The stinging slap of a lie echoed louder than the crash of the wine glass. For Rosa Reed, standing in the opulent dining room of the Gilded Spoon, it was the sound of her life hitting rock bottom. Fired, humiliated, and falsely accused of theft, she was cast out onto the cold city streets with nothing but a month's overdue rent and the worn silver pendant around her neck, her only link to a past she never knew. She clutched the familiar metal, a small, intricate compass, rose unaware that her public disgrace had been witnessed from a shadowed corner. She had no idea that the city's most powerful and enigmatic billionaire, a man haunted by his own tragic past, was about to see that very pendant and have his entire world come to a dead stop. The air in the Gilded Spoon was thick with the scent of money and roasted duck. It was a symphony of clinking glasses, hushed but important conversations, and the subtle scrape of silver on porcelain. For the patrons, it was an evening of indulgence. For Rosa Reed, it was another 6 hours on her aching feet, balancing a fragile smile and heavy trays. Rosa was not naive. She knew her place in this ecosystem. She was a ghost in a crisp black uniform there to facilitate luxury, not partake in it. At 24, her life had been a series of temporary addresses and transient connections, a consequence of growing up in the unforgiving churn of the foster care system. She had no family album, no childhood home to revisit. All she had was a fierce work ethic, a quiet resilience, and the silver pendant. It had been with her when she was found as a toddler, a silent, metallic clue to an origin story she'd spent countless nights trying to imagine. The pendant, a detailed compass rose with a tiny sapphire chip at the north point, was her anchor in a life that had always felt adrift. Tonight, her anchor felt particularly heavy. Her section included Table 7, occupied by the formidable Mrs. Delacroix and her 2 scowling, silent companions. Beatrice Delacroix was a woman sculpted from disapproval, her face a mask of pinched entitlement, her fingers heavy with diamonds that caught the light and seemed to mock the humble surroundings of anyone earning an hourly wage. "Waitress," she'd snapped earlier without making eye contact. "More water, no ice this time. Do you think I enjoy the sound of melting ice? It's distracting." Rosa had simply smiled her practiced, polite smile. "Of course, madam. Right away." The real trouble started with the wine. It was a bottle of Chateau Margaux that cost more than Rosa's monthly rent. Mrs. Delacroix had made a great show of sniffing it, swishing it, and finally giving a reluctant nod of approval. Rosa poured the first glass with the steady hand of a seasoned professional. It was as she was reaching to top up the second glass that it happened. One of Mrs. Delacroix's companions, a man with a bored expression, gestured expansively while telling a story, his arm knocking squarely into Rosa's. The bottle tilted. A cascade of crimson liquid, a $1,000 tide, surged across the pristine white tablecloth, splashing onto the bodice of Mrs. Delacroix's cream silk blouse. A collective gasp hushed the surrounding tables. Mrs. Delacroix shot to her feet, a look of theatrical horror on her face. "You clumsy oaf. Look what you've done. This blouse is ruined. It's couture." "I am so terribly sorry, madam." Rosa began, her heart pounding against her ribs. "Your guest? My guest? Are you blaming my guest for your incompetence?" Mrs. Delacroix's voice rose to a shrill crescendo, drawing every eye in the restaurant. "You were careless. This is precisely the sort of service one expects from places that hire riff-raff." The restaurant manager, Mr. Henderson, a man whose spine was made of jelly and whose primary skill was appeasing the wealthy, scurried over. He was short and balding, and he was already sweating. "Mrs. Delacroix, my deepest apologies. Is everything all right?" he asked, ignoring Rosa completely. No, everything is not all right, Jonathan. She spat, using his first name to assert her dominance. Your waitress has ruined my evening and my attire. I expect the restaurant to compensate me for the damages. Fully. Of course, Henderson soothed. The meal is on the house, and we will of course cover the cost of the blouse. We'll handle everything. Rosa stood frozen, humiliated. She knew it wasn't her fault, but she also knew that in this world the truth was a currency she couldn't afford. She began to quietly gather the soiled napkins, her face burning with shame. Then Mrs. Delacroix's eyes narrowed. She let out a small, sharp gasp, her hand flying to her neck, then her wrist, then her fingers. My ring, she whispered, her voice suddenly laced with a new, more venomous accusation. My God, my diamond ring, it's gone! Panic erupted. The woman's companions started looking under the table. Mr. Henderson's face went from pale to ghostly white. My sapphire engagement ring. Mrs. Delacroix clarified her gaze, locking onto Rosa. A family heirloom. It was on my finger just a moment ago, during the commotion. She pointed a trembling, accusatory finger at Rosa. You bumped into me. You were close to me. You must have taken it. The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. It was absurd. It was impossible. But the certainty in Mrs. Delacroix's voice was chilling. Madame, I would never, Rosa said, her own voice, trembling now, not with fear, but with a rising tide of indignation. I didn't touch you, and I certainly didn't steal anything. Search her, Mrs. Delacroix demanded, her voice ringing with authority. Mr. Henderson turned to Rosa, his expression a mixture of panic and grim resolution. Rosa, empty your pockets. Mr. Henderson, this is insane, Rosa pleaded, her eyes darting around at the sea of judging faces. I've worked here for 2 years. You know me. Empty your pockets. Now. His voice was cold, final. With shaking hands, Rosa pulled out the contents of her apron pockets. A notepad, a pen, a few crumpled dollars in tips, and a tube of lip balm. Nothing else. See, she said, her voice cracking. There's nothing. Mrs. Delacroix scoffed. She's obviously hidden it somewhere else, perhaps in her locker, or perhaps she slipped it off during the chaos. I want the police called. I want her arrested. That was the breaking point for Henderson. The word police in his immaculately curated establishment was a nightmare. He had to end this, and there was only one way to do it that didn't involve a scene with law enforcement. He had to offer a sacrifice. He turned to Rosa, his eyes devoid of any sympathy. Rosa Reed, you have caused a major disturbance, damaged a customer's property, and now you stand accused of theft. We have a zero-tolerance policy. You're fired. Get your things from your locker and leave the premises immediately. The words hit her like a physical blow. Fired! But I didn't do anything. My decision is final. Get out! He hissed, his face inches from hers. Don't make this any worse for yourself. Tears pricked Rosa's eyes, hot and furious. She looked from Henderson's cowardly face to Mrs. Delacroix's triumphant smirk. There was no justice here. There was only power and money, and she had neither. Swallowing the bile of injustice, she turned on her heel without another word. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction of seeing her break down completely. She walked the long, lonely path to the staff lockers, the stairs of the diners feeling like tiny needles on her back. She cleaned out her locker, a pathetic collection of a worn-out sweater, a dog-eared paperback, and an extra pair of comfortable shoes. As she pulled her thin coat on her fingers, instinctively went to the cool metal of her pendant. She clutched it, the familiar shape of the compass, rose a small, solid comfort in a world that had just dissolved beneath her feet. She walked out the back alley door, the sounds of the restaurant fading behind her. The cold night air hit her face, and for the first time, She allowed a single tear to trace a path down her cheek. She was jobless, falsely accused, and utterly alone. She pulled her coat tighter, the silver compass her only warmth, and walked off into the indifferent darkness of the city, never once looking back. In a secluded high-backed booth in the far corner of the Gilded Spoon, Sebastian Thorne had been nursing a glass of scotch for 2 hours. He despised places like this, the performative wealth, the superficial conversations. But this restaurant on this specific night was a ritual. It was the 22nd anniversary of the day his world had fractured, the day his 6-year-old sister Anastasia had been lost to the waves. The restaurant occupied the same building that once housed a small family-run bistro his parents had loved. It was the last place they had all eaten together as a family before the ill-fated trip. Every year, Sebastian came here, sat alone, and allowed the ghosts of his past to sit with him. At 32, Sebastian Thorne was a name that commanded respect and instilled fear in boardrooms across the globe. He had built a multi-billion-dollar empire from the ground up in technology and private equity. His face was known from magazine covers, his success legendary. But the sharp, custom-tailored suits and the air of unshakable confidence were armor protecting a core of profound, unhealed grief. He had survived the boating accident that had claimed his parents and sister. He had been found clinging to a piece of wreckage. But Anastasia, sweet, bright-eyed Anastasia, was simply gone. Presumed drowned. Her body was never recovered. He had been observing the drama at Table 7 with a detached, cynical eye. The spoiled theatrical woman, the weak, pandering manager, the young, flustered waitress. It was a tiresome little play he'd seen in 100 different forms. He felt a flicker of pity for the girl, but it was fleeting. The world was an unfair place. He'd learned that lesson at the age of 10. When the manager fired the waitress, Sebastian merely took a slow sip of his scotch. It was brutal, but it wasn't his business. He was about to signal for the check, ready to retreat back to the sterile silence of his penthouse when the girl walked past his booth. She was clearly trying to hold herself together, her chin held high, but her eyes were glassy with unshed tears. As she passed, a busboy carrying a precarious stack of dishes swerved to avoid another waiter bumping directly into her. A small, pathetic cascade of items fell from her open bag, a paperback book, a tube of lip balm, a set of keys. She let out a soft, defeated sigh and knelt to gather them. As she bent over, the simple chain around her neck swung forward, and the pendant that had been tucked beneath her uniform came into view, catching the dim, ambient light. For Sebastian Thorne, the world didn't just stop. It violently rewound, tearing through 22 years of scar tissue in a single brutal second. It couldn't be. His mind, usually a fortress of logic and calculated risk, became a maelstrom of raw, forgotten emotion. He wasn't looking at a piece of jewelry. He was looking at his past. He was looking at a ghost. The pendant. A silver compass rose. He knew every single detail of it without having to see it up close. He knew the 4 main points were slightly more rounded than a traditional design. He knew the E for east was stylized to look like a wave. And he knew with a certainty that stole the breath from his lungs that if he were to flip it over, he would find 2 sets of initials engraved on the back, LT and AT. Lucius and Anastasia Thorne. His father had them custom-made by a jeweler in Geneva. His was a heavy signet ring he never wore. Hers was this delicate silver pendant she never took off. His heart, a muscle he'd long considered dormant, began to hammer against his ribs with a force that made him dizzy. Anastasia. The girl Rosa, the manager, had called her quickly, scooped up her belongings, tucked the pendant back into her shirt, and straightened up. She didn't look his way. She just kept walking, her shoulders slumped, heading for the exit. "Wait," Sebastian croaked, but the word was a stranger in his own throat, barely a whisper. He pushed himself out of the booth, his legs unsteady. He threw a few $100 bills onto the table, his mind racing faster than it ever had during a hostile takeover. He had to get to her. He had to see that pendant up close. He had to know. He strode through the restaurant, ignoring the curious stares. He reached the front door and pushed it open, the cool night air, a shock to his system. He scanned the street. He saw her, a small, lonely figure, already halfway down the block, about to turn a corner. "Hey, wait!" He called out, his voice stronger this time, echoing in the quiet street. She either didn't hear him or chose to ignore him. In a few seconds, she rounded the corner and was gone. Sebastian stood on the pavement, the phantom chill of the Atlantic in 1999 prickling his skin. The city lights blurred around him. The noise, the people, the entire world faded into an insignificant hum. All that existed was the impossible image burned into his mind, his lost sister's pendant around the neck of a fired waitress. He was not a man who believed in miracles. He believed in facts, data, and tangible proof. But what he had just seen defied all logic. It was a 1 in a billion chance. It was impossible, and yet he had seen it. A new, unfamiliar feeling began to smolder in the pit of his stomach, displacing the cold grief that had lived there for 2 decades. It was a ferocious, desperate, and utterly consuming fire. It was hope. He turned and marched back into the restaurant, his expression now one of grim, unshakable determination. The patrons parted before him like the sea. He walked straight to Mr. Henderson, who was still fawning over a slightly calmed Mrs. Delacroix. Sebastian's presence was like a sudden drop in barometric pressure. Henderson looked up, his eyes widening, as he recognized the city's most formidable billionaire. "Mr. Thorne," he stammered. "An honor to have you this evening. I hope everything was to your satisfaction." Sebastian ignored the pleasantries. His voice was low, cold, and carried an unmistakable threat. "The waitress you just fired, Rosa Reed. I want her file. I want her address, her phone number, every piece of information you have on her. You have 60 seconds. Mr. Henderson's sycophantic smile dissolved into a mask of pure terror. Sebastian Thorne was not a man one displeased. The legends about his ruthlessness in business were whispered in every corner of the financial world. To have that cold, predatory focus directed at him over a dismissed waitress was a nightmare he couldn't have fathomed. "Her file, Mr. Thorne, Staff records are confidential," Henderson began weakly, his instincts for self-preservation warring with company policy. Sebastian didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. He simply leaned in slightly, his grey eyes like chips of granite. "Confidentiality is a privilege you can no longer afford. You have a restaurant to run. A health and safety inspection is scheduled for 8 a.m. tomorrow. A full financial audit of your parent company's tax records can be initiated with a single phone call. I can have this establishment shut down before you've had your morning coffee. Now I will ask you one last time. Where is her file?" Beads of sweat popped on Henderson's forehead. He swallowed hard. "Right away, Mr. Thorne. Right this way." He practically sprinted to his cramped back office, fumbling with a key to a filing cabinet. He pulled out a thin manila folder, labeled "Read Rosa," and handed it to Sebastian with a trembling hand. Sebastian snatched it and flipped it open. The information was sparse. An address in a rundown neighborhood across town, a cell phone number, and a social security number. No next of kin. No emergency contact. It was the file of a person utterly alone in the world. Just like Anastasia would be. He took out his phone and snapped a picture of the single page. He then looked at the two people still at table 7. Mrs. Delacroix was watching him with a mixture of awe and fear. "As for you," Sebastian said, his voice dripping with ice, "your meal is no longer on the house. You will pay for the wine you intentionally had spilled. And if I ever hear of you frequenting any establishment, I have a stake in which is more than you can possibly imagine you will be removed. Am I clear?" Mrs. Delacroix, who had terrorized a manager moments before, could only nod her face pale and her mouth agape. Sebastian turned and left without another word. As soon as he was inside his chauffeured sedan, the armor of the cold-hearted billionaire fell away, replaced by the raw urgency of a brother who might have just found a ghost. "Marcus," he said into his phone, his voice tight. "Change of plans. I'm sending you a photo, a name Rosa Reed, and an address. I want you to find her. Now, be discreet. I don't want her scared off. Just get eyes on her. Confirm she's there. That's all. Marcus Thorne." No relation, but a man bound by a decade of loyalty and a shared past in the military, was Sebastian's head of security and his only true confidant. His voice came back calm and steady. "Understood. On my way." While Marcus, mobilized, Rosa was living through the longest night of her life. She'd taken the bus back to her small, dingy apartment, the injustice of the evening churning in her stomach. The accusation of theft was what hurt the most. Her entire life she had prided herself on her integrity. It was the one thing she owned, the one thing she had built for herself. And in a moment, it had been stripped away by a rich woman's whim. She sat on the edge of her lumpy mattress, the single window looking out onto a brick wall. The eviction notice taped to her door seemed to mock her. She had been counting on her next paycheck to beg for another week from her landlord. Now that was gone. Panic began to set in cold and sharp. What was she going to do? Where would she go? Her fingers, as they always did in times of stress, found the pendant. She pulled it out and looked at it. The silver compass rose a guide, with no true north to offer. On the back, she traced the familiar, elegant engravings she had memorized as a child, ad astra per aspera. She'd looked it up once, through hardship to the stars. Below it were the initials LT and AT, who were LT and AT, her parents, a brother or sister. The questions were a constant, dull ache in her heart. Tonight the ache was sharper than ever. The pendant felt less like a comfort, and more like a cruel joke, a remnant of a life and a family she was denied. For a fleeting, desperate moment, she wondered what it might be worth. Could she pawn it? The thought felt like a betrayal, a severing of her only tie to her own history. She pushed the thought away, disgusted with herself. An hour later, Marcus arrived at the run-down apartment building. He was a tall, imposing man who moved with a quiet efficiency that made him seem to fade into the background. He didn't approach the door. Instead, he spoke to the building's disgruntled superintendent, a $50 bill making the man remarkably helpful. "Yeah, the girl in 3B, Rosa," the super said, pocketing the cash. "Got an eviction notice yesterday. Saw her packing this afternoon. Said she was staying with a friend for a bit, try and figure things out. No idea who or where." Marcus's jaw tightened. "Did she leave a forwarding address?" "Nah. Girls like that, they don't have forwarding addresses. They just disappear." Marcus relayed the information to Sebastian. "The trail's gone cold at the apartment, Seb. She's already moved on. Landlord has no idea where." Sebastian was pacing the length of his vast, minimalist penthouse, the city lights twinkling below like a galaxy of indifferent stars. Frustration, a rare emotion for him, was mounting. Disappear people don't just disappear. Find her, Marcus. Use whatever resources you need. Credit card activity, phone pings, social media, DMV records. I want to know where she bought her last coffee. I want to know where she is." "I'm on it," Marcus replied. "But a girl with no credit, a prepaid burner phone, and no car, it's like finding a needle in a haystack." "Then buy the haystack," Sebastian ordered, his voice strained, "and burn it until you find the needle." He hung up and stared out the window. For 22 years he had accepted that Anastasia was gone. He had built a life, an empire, on the foundations of that loss. Now a single glimpse of a silver pendant had torn that foundation apart. If it was her, if she had been alive all this time, living a life of poverty and struggle while he lived in unimaginable luxury, the thought was a knife to his soul. The search was on. Sebastian Thorne, a man who could locate any asset track, any stock, and uncover any corporate secret, was now hunting for one lone woman in a city of millions. And as the hours turned into days, the needle remained stubbornly, agonizingly lost in the haystack. Rosa Reed, it seemed, had vanished without a trace. 3 days passed. 3 days of maddening silence and dead ends. Marcus's team, the best money could buy, came up with nothing. Rosa Reed paid for everything in cash. Her phone was a cheap prepaid model that she'd stopped using the night she was fired. She had no social media presence, no driver's license, no credit history to speak of. She was a ghost, expertly navigating the cracks of a society built on digital footprints. Sebastian grew more volatile with each passing hour. His business empire, usually his sole focus, was neglected. Multi-million-dollar deals were left hanging. His staff tiptoed around him, terrified of the silent fury that radiated from his office. He was a predator, denied its prey, and his frustration was beginning to curdle into despair. Was he wrong? Did he imagine it? Was it just a similar-looking pendant, a cruel coincidence that had sent him on this wild goose chase? He couldn't accept that. His memory was eidetic. He knew what he saw. On the 4th day, pacing his office like a caged panther, he stopped. He was thinking like a billionaire using technology and money. He needed to think about the source, the restaurant, the incident itself. "Marcus," he said, calling his security chief, "stop looking for Rosa for a moment. I want you to change focus. I want to know everything about the woman from table 7, Beatrice Delacroix." "The customer?" Marcus asked, surprised. "The one who accused Rosa of theft. Dig into her, her finances, her husband, her social life. I want to know what she had for breakfast. I want leverage." Sebastian's voice was grim. He sensed there was something wrong with that picture, something too performative about her outrage. It took Marcus less than 24 hours to unravel the Delacroix's carefully constructed facade. What he found was dynamite. Beatrice's husband, Richard Delacroix, was on the brink of catastrophic bankruptcy. His import-export business was hemorrhaging money, and they were leveraged to the hilt. The couture clothes, the expensive wine, the flashy diamonds, it was all a charade. They were broke, and they were desperate. The ring she claimed was stolen, Marcus reported to Sebastian over the phone. The heirloom sapphire. She pawned the real one 6 months ago in a private sale to cover a gambling debt. The one she was wearing that night was a very good cubic zirconia replica, worth maybe $500. Sebastian stood perfectly still, the pieces clicking into place with cold, brutal clarity. It was a scam. "Looks that way," Marcus confirmed. "My analyst thinks she was planning to cause a scene and pressure the restaurant's insurance for a massive settlement for the stolen heirloom. The spilled wine gave her the perfect opportunity. The waitress was just a convenient scapegoat." A black, icy rage, purer than any he had ever felt, settled over Sebastian. Rosa hadn't just been fired. She had been framed, her life ruined, to facilitate a cheap insurance scam. "Arrange a meeting with Mrs. Delacroix," Sebastian commanded. "Here, my office. Now." Meanwhile, Rosa's situation had gone from dire to desperate. The friend she was staying with, another waitress named Sophie, had her own struggles and couldn't house her for long. Rosa had spent days pounding the pavement looking for any work, diner, coffee shop, bar, but the story from the Gilded Spoon seemed to follow her. A quiet phone call from a concerned Mr. Henderson to a few colleagues in the industry was all it took to unofficially blacklist her. No one wanted to hire an accused thief. Her money was gone. She was down to her last few dollars, and the gnawing ache in her stomach was a constant reminder of her failure. That evening, sitting in Sophie's tiny kitchen, she made a decision that felt like a piece of her soul was being carved out. She had to sell the pendant. With a heavy heart, she found a grimy, dusty pawn shop in a part of town she usually avoided. The pawnbroker, a man with greasy hair and suspicious eyes, examined the compass rose under a jeweler's loupe. "It's silver. Not worth much," he grunted. "I'll give you $50 for it." 50. Rosa's heart sank. But the craftsmanship is so detailed, and the little stone. The stone's a chip of sapphire, maybe. Too small to matter. The value here isn't the material, it's the make. This is a custom job. High-end, probably from Europe. Geneva may be judging by the style of the clasp. He looked at her, his eyes narrowing. "Where'd a girl like you get something like this? It's mine," Rosa said defensively, her hand hovering over it. "It's all I have from my family." "Right. Look, $50. Take it or leave it," he said, already losing interest. Rosa hesitated. Geneva. The word echoed in her mind, a place she'd only ever seen in movies. It was the first real clue about her past she'd ever had. Suddenly selling it felt even more impossible. "No," she said, pulling the pendant back. "I'm sorry, I can't." She left the shop, her heart heavy, but resolute. She would starve before she sold it. That single word, Geneva, had reignited a tiny ember of hope. At that exact moment, 2 miles away, Beatrice Delacroix was being ushered into Sebastian Thorne's penthouse office. The room was larger than her entire apartment, with a floor-to-ceiling window offering a godlike view of the city. Sebastian sat behind a massive obsidian desk, not speaking, just watching her. Marcus stood by the door, an immovable sentinel. "Mr. Thorne." Beatrice began trying to project an air of confused sophistication. "I was told you wished to see me. I'm not sure why I—" "Sit," he commanded. She sat. He let the silence stretch a tactic he used to dismantle even the most hardened executives. Finally, he slid a single piece of paper across the desk. It was a copy of the pawn ticket for her real sapphire ring. Beatrice's face went white. All the blood drained from it, leaving behind a sallow, terrified shell. "Your scam was pathetic," Sebastian said, his voice quiet but deadly. "You and your husband are bankrupt. You staged the entire incident at the restaurant to defraud their insurance company. And in doing so, you destroyed the life of an innocent young woman for what would have amounted to a pittance." I don't know what you're talking about." She stammered, her eyes wide with panic. "Don't lie to me." He snapped, his voice cracking like a whip. "I have the power to not only expose you, but to personally finance the prosecution against you. You will be charged with fraud, perjury, and conspiracy. Your husband's remaining business assets will be frozen. You will lose everything. You will go to jail. Or," he paused, letting the alternative hang in the air, "you can help me." Tears began to stream down Beatrice's face, washing away the last of her composure. "Help you? What do you want?" "I want to find Rosa Reed," he said. "You owe her. You owe her more than you can ever repay, but you will start by helping me find her. You will rack your brain for every single detail of that night." Did she say anything? Mention anyone? A place she was going? Anything? Beatrice, now sobbing uncontrollably, tried to think. No, nothing. She just left. She was so quiet. Then a flicker of memory. Wait, the busboy. The one who bumped into her. He helped her pick up her things. He might have seen something, heard something. It was a small lead, but it was more than they'd had in days. "Marcus," Sebastian ordered. "Get back to the restaurant. Find the busboy. Get his statement, now." As Marcus left, Sebastian stared down at the broken woman before him. He felt no pity, only a burning need to right the catastrophic wrong she had set in motion. He was closer than ever, and he wouldn't let the trail go cold again. The busboy, a young student named Leo, was a font of information. Terrified but eager to help after Marcus explained the situation and offered a generous reward for his time, he recounted the brief interaction with Rosa. "She was really upset," Leo said, wringing his hands. "When her stuff fell, I helped her pick it up. I saw her necklace. It was cool, like an old compass. She was talking to herself, kind of whispering. Something about Sophie's couch, not lasting forever, and needing to find a job before she ended up at the shelter." "A shelter?" Marcus pressed. "Did she say which one?" "Yeah, I think so. The one over on Westmoreland. The Haven House shelter for women. My aunt volunteers there sometimes. I think Rosa said she used to stay there years ago when she first aged out of the system." It was the breakthrough they needed. Marcus relayed the information to Sebastian instantly. "Haven House shelter. It's a strong possibility, Seb. It fits." "I'm going myself," Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. He grabbed his car keys, forgoing his driver. This was not a task he could delegate. This was a journey he had to make alone. He drove through the city, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. His mind was a whirlwind of hope and terror. What if it was her? What would he say? How do you reintroduce yourself to a sister who thinks she's an orphan? What if she hated him for the life he'd had? The life she'd been denied? And what if, after all this, it wasn't her? What if it was just a final cruel twist of fate? He pulled up a block away from Haven House, a modest but clean brick building. He sat in his car for a full 5 minutes, composing himself, his heart threatening to beat its way out of his chest. He finally got out and walked to the entrance, a man who commanded global markets, feeling as vulnerable as a lost child. Inside the shelter was quiet and smelled of antiseptic and warm soup. A kind-faced woman at the front desk looked up. "Can I help you, sir? I'm looking for someone," Sebastian said, his voice huskier than usual. "Her name is Rosa Reed. I was told she might be here." The woman's expression was guarded. "We don't give out information about our residents." "Please," Sebastian insisted, leaning forward, his desperation overriding his usual command. "It's a family matter. It's urgent. Life and death." The woman studied his face, seeing past the expensive suit to the raw anguish in his eyes. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "She checked in an hour ago. Room 204, but she isn't planning on staying. She's just gathering the last of her things from storage here. She's leaving the city tonight." Leaving the city? He had almost missed her. He took the stairs 2 at a time. The hallway was narrow, painted a pale, sterile yellow. He found room 204. The door was slightly ajar. He could hear the soft sounds of movement inside. He pushed it open gently. The room was tiny, containing only a metal frame bed and a small dresser. Rosa stood with her back to him, folding a faded sweater into a worn-out backpack on the bed. She looked smaller and more fragile than he remembered. His voice was a ghost of a sound. "Rosa." She froze. Slowly she turned around. Her eyes widened when she saw him, a flicker of confusion and fear in them. She didn't recognize him as the man from the restaurant. She just saw a tall, imposing stranger in an expensive suit standing in the doorway of her temporary room. "Who are you?" she asked, taking a half-step back. "How do you know my name?" "My name is Sebastian Thorne," he said gently, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "I'm not here to hurt you. I was at the restaurant the other night. I saw what happened. It was wrong." Her expression hardened. "If you're from the restaurant, I have nothing to say. I'm leaving. Please just 1 minute." He begged, his voice cracking. The sound of his own vulnerability surprised them both. "It's not about the restaurant. It's about your pendant, the one you're wearing." Her hand flew to her chest, covering the pendant protectively. "What about it? May I see it?" "Please, it's more important than you can possibly imagine." She hesitated, her fear warring with a new sense of curiosity. There was a desperate sincerity in his eyes that was unnerving but compelling. Slowly, cautiously, she pulled the chain over her head and held it out, keeping her distance. He didn't take it from her. He just looked at it, his gaze intense. "The sapphire chip," he whispered more to himself than to her. "At the North Point." He looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. May I see the back?" Her heart started to pound. This man knew her pendant. With trembling fingers she turned it over. Sebastian's breath hitched. He saw the familiar elegant script he had traced 1,000 times in his memory. Ad astra per aspera. And below it the initials that had haunted his dreams for 22 years. LT and AT, Lucius and Anastasia Thorne. He said, his voice thick with a quarter-century of grief and a moment of impossible joy. Rosa stared at him confused. "What did you say?" "My name," he clarified, his gaze locked on hers. "My birth name is Lucius Thorne. Everyone calls me Sebastian now. My father's name was Liam. My mother was Amelia. But my sister's name was Anastasia." The world seemed to tilt on its axis for Rosa. Lucius and Anastasia, LT and AT, the initials on her pendant. It couldn't be. It was the stuff of daydreams, of fantasies she'd had as a lonely child. "I don't understand," she whispered, her head spinning. "We were on our parents' boat," he said, the story pouring out of him now. "There was a storm. It came out of nowhere. The boat capsized. I was 10 years old. You were 6. I remember holding on to your hand in the water, but a huge wave, tore us apart. They found me hours later, clinging to debris. They never found you or our parents. You were declared lost, presumed dead." He reached into his own coat and pulled out a heavy platinum card case. From a hidden compartment, he slid out an old, faded photograph. It was creased and worn from decades of handling. It showed a smiling boy of about 10, his arm around a little girl with bright eyes and a gap-toothed grin. Around the little girl's neck, clearly visible, was the silver compass rose pendant. Rosa looked from the photograph to Sebastian's face, and for the first time she saw it. The resemblance wasn't in the jawline or the nose, which had been changed by age and hardship, but in the eyes. The same intense grey eyes as the boy in the picture. Her eyes. The backpack slipped from her numb fingers and fell to the floor. The strength went out of her legs, and she stumbled back, landing on the edge of the bed. My brother." The word felt alien on her tongue. "Anastasia." he said, taking a step closer, his face a portrait of disbelief and wonder. You survived. You've been alive all this time. The dam of a lifetime of loneliness, of questions of feeling utterly adrift, finally broke. Sobs racked Rosa's body, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming, earth-shattering release. She wasn't an orphan. She wasn't a nobody. She wasn't Rosa Reed, the foster kid. She was Anastasia Thorne. She had a name. She had a history. She had a brother. Sebastian knelt in front of her, his own tears finally falling freely. He didn't touch her, not yet. He just let her see him, let the truth settle between them in the small, sterile room. I looked for you, he choked out. For years I hoped. But they told me to stop. They told me you were gone. She looked at him through her tears, at this powerful, wealthy stranger who was impossibly her family. I always felt like a part of me was missing, she whispered. Now I know why. In the quiet of the Haven House shelter, far from the world of glittering restaurants and corporate boardrooms, a brother and sister separated by tragedy and time finally found their way back to each other. The compass, after a lifetime of spinning, had finally pointed north. It had pointed home. The tiny room at the Haven House shelter, which moments before had felt like the final closing chapter of Rosa Reed's life, was now the birthplace of Anastasia Thorne's. The air was thick with the impossible reality of it all. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Sebastian remained kneeling before her, his gaze fixed on her face as if afraid she might vanish if he blinked. Anastasia, the name still felt foreign, a garment made for someone else, clutched the photograph in one hand and the pendant in the other, her two pieces of tangible history. Finally, Sebastian rose, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't the cold, commanding billionaire anymore. He was simply a man who had been given back a piece of his soul. We can't stay here, he said, his voice soft, as if speaking to a startled fawn. Let me take you home. The word home struck a discordant note in Anastasia's mind. Home had been a series of temporary rooms, foster houses, and cramped apartments. The concept of a true home, a place of belonging, was an abstract fantasy. She looked down at her worn backpack containing the entirety of her worldly possessions. Then she looked at the man before her in his perfectly tailored suit that likely cost more than she'd earned in a year. The gulf between their two worlds was a chasm. I don't know, she stammered, feeling a sudden overwhelming urge to run. It was all too much, too fast. I can't just... Sebastian understood. He saw the panic in her eyes. He had to ground this, make it real, but not terrifying. Okay. One step at a time, he said, his voice calm and reassuring. First, let's get you out of here. You don't have to decide anything. You don't have to do anything. Just let me make sure you're safe. Please, Anastasia. Hearing him say her name again sent a shiver through her. It was real. She looked into his eyes, and saw not a stranger, but the boy from the photograph. She gave a small, shaky nod. Sebastian made a single brief phone call. Marcus, bring the car to the front of the Haven House shelter on Westmoreland. Have a security detail sweep the area and maintain a discreet distance. No press. No one gets close. And cancel my entire schedule for the next week. As they walked out of the shelter, Anastasia felt the eyes of the receptionist on her. The woman's expression was one of pure astonishment as she watched the young woman who had checked in an hour ago, destitute and defeated, now leaving with the infamous Sebastian Thorne. The moment they stepped outside the chasm between their worlds became blindingly apparent. A sleek black Audi A8, silent and imposing, was waiting at the curb. a man with a professional demeanor. Marcus held the rear door open. Anastasia hesitated, clutching her backpack strap. This was a car she'd only ever seen in movies. It felt like stepping onto a different planet. Sebastian gently placed a hand on her elbow. "It's okay," he whispered. "I'm right here." She slid into the plush leather interior, the door closing with a soft, solid thud that sealed off the sounds of the city. The car smelled of leather and quiet wealth. Sebastian got in beside her, and the vehicle pulled away from the curb with a smooth, silent grace. Anastasia watched the drab facade of the Haven house recede the last remnant of her old life, disappearing in the rearview mirror. They drove in silence for a while, the city lights streaking past the tinted windows. Anastasia stared out, watching the world she knew, the bus stops, the cheap diners, the laundromats go by from inside a bubble of impossible luxury. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice small. "To my home," Sebastian replied. Our home for now. It's quiet. It's private. No one will bother you there." He paused, then added, "There are things I kept. Things that belonged to our parents. Photographs. Your room. I never changed it." The thought of a room untouched for 22 years, waiting for a ghost, sent a fresh wave of emotion through her. When they arrived at the private underground garage of his penthouse building, he led her to a private elevator. It opened directly into his apartment, a sprawling, breathtaking space of glass, steel, and minimalist art. The entire city glittered below them like a carpet of scattered diamonds. It was beautiful, but it was also cold, vast, and achingly lonely. Anastasia felt like a sparrow in a cathedral. "I know this is a lot," Sebastian said, sensing her unease. "There's a guest wing. It's more comfortable, less stark. I had the staff prepare it for you. Fresh clothes, whatever you need." "I have my backpack," she said, holding it up slightly, a pathetic shield against this new reality. A pained expression crossed Sebastian's face. "Of course," he said quickly. He wouldn't push. He led her to a suite of rooms that were larger than any apartment she'd ever lived in, with a soft bed, a private bathroom, stocked with luxurious items, and a window with the same stunning view. "Rest," he said from the doorway. "We can talk whenever you're ready. Or we don't have to. Just rest." He left, closing the door softly behind him. Anastasia stood in the center of the room, her backpack still slung over her shoulder. She walked to the window and pressed her hand against the cool glass. She was here in this palace in the sky, but she had never felt more lost. She was no longer Rosa Reed, but she wasn't sure how to be Anastasia Thorne. Later that evening, after a long shower where she let the hot water wash away the grime of the last week, she found Sebastian in a large study. He was staring at a framed document on the wall. A map. "It's a nautical chart of the area where the boat went down," he said, without turning. "I've spent years going over it with experts, looking for a different current, a different possibility, anything to explain how they could have missed you." He turned to her. He had changed out of his suit into a simple grey cashmere sweater, looking younger and less formidable. "They told me you were gone," he said, his voice raw. "A child psychologist told me I had invented a memory of you surviving to cope with the trauma. For years I let myself believe them. It was easier than the hope, which was excruciating." "I don't remember," Anastasia confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "I have dreams sometimes. Water, the color blue, a feeling of being cold, and a song, a lullaby, that's all." Sebastian's eyes welled up. "Mother used to sing you a lullaby every night, about a silver star. The pieces were scattered, But they were starting to fit. They spent the next hour talking, filling in the vast, empty spaces of their shared history. He talked about their parents, their childhood home, his lonely life after the accident. She talked about the blur of foster homes, the constant feeling of being an outsider, the fierce independence she'd had to cultivate to survive. As she spoke about her firing, Sebastian's expression hardened the comforting brother, momentarily replaced by the ruthless CEO. He picked up his phone. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Tying up a loose end," he said, his voice flat and cold. He dialed a number. "Get me Jonathan Henderson," he commanded without preamble. A moment later, "Henderson, this is Thorne. Your career in the hospitality industry is over. You will be terminated by morning. If you ever work in this city again, in any capacity, I will personally acquire the company that hires you and liquidate your position. Goodbye." He hung up. Anastasia was stunned by the casual, absolute power in his voice. "And Mrs. Delacroix?" she asked. "She is a more complex problem," Sebastian said, his jaw tight. "She committed fraud. She framed you. She deserves to be in prison." He looked at Anastasia, his expression softening. "But her fate is not my decision to make. It's yours. Tell me what you want to happen to her, and it will be done." Anastasia thought for a long time. Her first instinct was anger, a desire for revenge against the woman who had humiliated her and pushed her to the brink. But then she thought of the abject terror on Beatrice's face, as she would be exposed and ruined. She had lived a life of powerlessness. She didn't want her first act of power to be one of pure destruction. "I don't want her to go to jail," she said finally, surprising even herself. "I want her to pay. I want every dollar she tried to scam from the restaurant to be donated to Haven House. I want her to sell her fake jewelry and her real clothes and give that money away too. And I want her to work. I want her to volunteer at the shelter's soup kitchen for a year. I want her to see what real desperation looks like." Sebastian stared at her, a slow smile spreading across his face. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile. In her decision, he saw not weakness, but a strength and compassion that had survived everything. He saw the heart of the sister he remembered. "Consider it done," he said. He then walked to a safe hidden behind a painting and pulled out a small velvet-covered box. He opened it. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark blue silk, was a heavy silver signet ring. It was carved with the same compass, rose as her pendant. "Father's," he said. "He had them made as a set. One for him, one for you." He picked it up and pointed to the inside of the band. Engraved there was the same motto, ad astra per aspera. He held it out next to her pendant, which she had placed on the desk. The two pieces of silver separated for 22 years were finally reunited. Brother and sister. Lucius and Anastasia. The compass and the ring. For the first time, looking at the two objects together in the quiet luxury of the study, it felt completely, undeniably real. "Welcome home, Anastasia," Sebastian said, his voice thick with emotion. And for the first time, she didn't flinch at the word. She was home. From a humiliating firing to an unbelievable reunion, Rosa's, or rather Anastasia's, story is a stunning testament to the power of hope and the unbreakable threads of destiny that can connect us even across decades of separation. Her journey from the depths of despair, clutching a simple silver pendant, to the stunning discovery of her true identity, and the embrace of the brother who never truly stopped searching, reminds us that our past is never truly lost, and that justice sometimes finds a way. It's a powerful reminder that even in our darkest moments, a miracle might be waiting just around the corner, sparked by the smallest of clues. If this incredible story of loss, resilience, and the unbreakable bonds of family moved you, please let us know by hitting that like button. Share this video with friends, family, or anyone who needs a reminder that hope is never truly gone. And for more unforgettable, real-life dramas that will capture your heart, make sure you subscribe to our channel and ring the notification bell. What was the most shocking part of the story for you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing from you.